Greetings and welcome to the Home Slice. This is a standard intro. If you already know what's up with my 40mm Manila rope testing, the ANDE rope test, then you can skip to this time listed on screen. This is where the actual edge test begins. If you haven't been here before, then you've caught me in the middle of a testing series where I'm taking Victorinox knives because they're simple steel that's mainly just steel. There's not a bunch of extra alloys and carbide things going on in them. And I'm testing what different sharpening stones do to them. I'm testing fine, medium, and coarse stones individually. Then I'm taking the best from those and I'm making what's called a dual grit edge. If you're new to the channel, a dual grit edge is where you sharpen one side coarse or medium and the other side of the edge you sharpen fine. It has some really interesting characteristics. Usually it creates an aggressive edge that lasts longer than it normally would with either coarse or fine, with some exceptions, which we're testing to find out. Anyway, my test consists of, I've got a little goofy rig that I slice through a 1 centimeter thick sisal rope, and it's on a 45-degree wedge. It's intended to transfer that force down, and then I measure how many kilograms of pressure it took to slice through the rope while holding the rope vertical. That's intended to take forward motion and quantify how much pressure it took to slice through. This gives you some rough idea of edge aggression. The next test is to cut through a 40mm thick Manila rope, and then I test on a Best machine tester to test how keen and nice the edge stayed. I do that until it's over 400 grams on the Best tester, checking with microscope and checking to see when it loses shaving capability in between tests. After 3, I will hammer the edge into a pine piano leg, and that's just to see if any of the edges break on impact. There are certain sharpening methods I've found that create an edge that's not as robust to impact tasks, and I want to kind of weed those out because for a working edge, I want it to be reasonably durable. Anyway, that's what we're testing for today. In just a second, we'll skip right over to the test footage, and I will let you know what the finishing stone that we're actually testing was.
Just a note before we get started, some guys have asked for scaling, and this is a measuring tape in millimeters. And as I try to get that mark on the left-hand side centered, I find I can't quite get the mark on the right on screen. So my best guess is that fully zoomed in, as all these tests are, my microscope, the full screen shoots about 1.8 millimeters. Now I've put 36 hyphens on screen, which means each of those is roughly 50 microns. So I'll bring that back later in the videos for scale. A little bit of a red flag there with quite a high best number to start out with. Anyway, we're kicking off dual grit testing. We're going to control the variable of which coarse stone we use, so the next few tests will all be sharpened on the coarse side with the 250 grit easy lap stone, and we're going to try different fine stones with it, this one being the Japanese natural. I've frozen the number here so that you can read the slicing aggression. I'll just have to apologize because I just got over a sickness and my voice is really unusually low and bassy and weird. Anyway, not bad numbers for the slicing aggression, but definitely not the best that we've seen by any stretch of the imagination. This is the coarse side of the edge under the microscope, and that Easy Lap 250 looks great. There's alternating directions because I really try to minimize burr on the stones, because I find that if you can get away with somewhat minimal stropping, it can have good effects with dual grit, though that's something that we'll have to confirm and look into through this research. And as we flip to the Japanese natural side of the edge, I'm going to leave the numbers up on screen because those two dashes are about 100 microns wide. And you can see that there's an apex extension of maybe 40 to 50 microns. Now, I haven't looked at dual grit edges on Victorinox knives under the microscope before, so I'm not sure if that is going to be kind of a normal look for a dual grit edge, or if we should be concerned when we see something of that size. It seems pretty big, But time will tell, of course. We've shot up to 384 grams on the first pass and no longer shaving, so it's not looking good at the outset for this method that I've used with the Japanese natural stone and easy lap stone. After the second pass, we've gone down to 359, whether that's by wearing away a bit or whether that's by the breaking off of that edge, I'm sure we will see in the microscope. Holding steady at the third pass at 366 grams, not a bad number, but in my hand I could feel the aggression falling more than I usually experience with a dual grit edge. I've frozen it at 7.1 kg, the max reading, so a calculated loss of aggression of about 3.9 kgs of additional force needed. Now in the microscope is where we begin to see things really that are concerning, because you can see that although I didn't know whether this was just a normal dual grit edge or a wire edge, you can see the characteristic folding back and forth of portions of the apex. There's portions that remain, which explain why I'm still getting some good numbers on the best machine. Some of that edge is holding up, but there in the initial shots, you could really see the shadows and light changing, indicating that the edge has folded back and forth. Doesn't do bad on the impact test considering, and I think that something that this test in particular shows me is that we need to test fresh edges that haven't had a lot of their fresh surface worn away by the rope, and we need to do more hits on them. So I'll do that in an upcoming test with some of the better performing blades. 12 grams observed loss. Let's head back to the microscope and see how that edge looks. And here you can really see what I'm talking about. There's that reflective surface, but you can observe changes in it where it looks like it waves back and forth just slightly. And that is an indication that this is performing. Oh, there's even sections that are gone. Look at that. Anyway, it is an indicator that this is performing not properly as a dual grit edge, because I've seen edges that don't perform in this way either by feel or by best number. But this is performing more as a wire edge. This doesn't mean that a Japanese natural stone, I don't think, couldn't make an effective dual grit edge. It just means that with the amount of work that I put into it and the sharpening skill that I have at present, it hasn't been the best performing option to produce one the most easily. I think if you had a Japanese natural stone, you want to dual grit it, you could probably work on a stropping protocol to remove a little bit more damaged metal. Completing a fourth pass through the ANDE rope before going over 400 does put this edge at higher than normal wear resistance performance, but with some somewhat concerning lack of stability and durability. So I wouldn't recommend this as a dual grit edge generally, unless you find some adaptive strategies to clean it up.
Another note is this piece of paper that I had my notes on. It's very, very rough on the paper cut. Not like a normal dual grit edge where when you finish it up, you can get through the paper, but yeah, it's not the normal feel that you experience. Yeah, it's not good. And that's very different, very, very different from the original dual grit, which I've tested, and the Spyderco Ultrafine dual grit, which did very well. Those are the two dual grit edges that have been the best performers so far. And this doesn't really line up. The data doesn't really line up with this. So those are kind of my takeaways. I hope you enjoyed that. If you want to check out the last test, which was a 400 grit CBN stone, or 400 mesh, they call it. CBN stone. I'll put that on screen now. For the rest of you, peace out from the home slice. I hope you have a great day. Bye.